Picture this. It's early in the 20th century. Women and African Americans around the United States are fighting the battle for equality and voting rights. In a time of monumental segregation, the United States is anything but united. People are risking their lives in this fight for equality. This fight to have a voice in the future of their country and give a voice to their future descendants. Fast forward to modern day America. After years of hardships and battle, people are passing up on that very right. In 2016, 138 million United States citizens voted. At first glance, that number might seem great, but that was only 58.1% of the eligible voting population. This means that voter turnout rates have not increased since 2008, when voter turnout was 61.6% of the eligible voting population, or 2012, when voter turnout was 58.6% of the voting population. This gap in voter participation will only continue to grow unless action is taken. So what can we do to close this gap? One word: education. Many American citizens choose not to vote due to a lack of education in politics, democracy, and voting rights. As an elementary education major who highly respects her civic mission, I wanted to know what I could do to make a change in this voter participation issue. The answer is simple: educate kids young on voting rights, the voting process, and democracy in general. The best way to do this is to take it back to the beginning, starting with the Civil War, which occurred from 1861 to 1865. The North and the South were divided over many topics, but especially the emancipation of African American slaves. After years of bloodshed, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant, and the Union had won. African American slaves were freed via the 13th Amendment, which states, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." However, freedom is not exactly what followed for African American citizens. Laws and codes were immediately set into place to control the rights of African Americans. These were known as Jim Crow laws. At the same time, hateful groups began to form, such as the KKK, which targeted African American citizens and anybody who supported their rights. In 1870, after years of protesting, Congress granted African American citizens the right to vote via the 15th Amendment, which states, "The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." Still, states found ways around this amendment, via voting taxes, literacy tests, property ownership requirements, and much more. In the 1950s, the civil rights movement began to protest for the rights of racial minorities. Many activists took part in marches and other events where they peacefully protested for their rights, and in return they were heckled, beaten, and arrested. In 1964, a Civil Rights Act was passed to protect some voting rights. In 1965, James Bevel, Martin Luther King Jr., and many other activists marched on Selma, Alabama. As a result of their peaceful protesting, these activists faced police brutality and violence.
You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote. You beat me in the side.
They were also arrested. This protest received mass media coverage and proved that America had a long way to go in recognizing the equality of every race. Because of events such as Bloody Sunday, President Lyndon B. Johnson moved for the voting rights of African American citizens. On March 15th of 1965, he gave a speech calling out all of the ways that African American citizens had been oppressed and denied their rights for years.
It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country.
Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act on August 6th of 1965. The act shut down laws that denied African American citizens their right to vote, such as poll taxes and literacy tests. Soon after, nearly 250,000 African American citizens were registered to vote. This was a huge win. Around the same time period, women were fighting for their right to vote. Various organizations supporting equal rights began to form. This included activists for women's suffrage. In 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was held, where women and men got together to discuss the issue of women's rights in America. Activists such as Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton attended to discuss the fact that women deserved the same rights as men. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association was formed, which fought for universal suffrage by teaming up with the South and refusing to support the 15th Amendment. Those who were pro-15th Amendment formed the American Women's Suffrage Association. Groups were also forming that were anti-women's suffrage, some of these groups containing women. The National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association eventually merged to create the National American Women's Suffrage Association, their first president being Elizabeth Cady Stanton. With the merging of these two organizations came about a new argument. Women deserve the right to vote because they are different than men, rather than the same. On August 26th of 1920, the 19th Amendment was finally passed. It stated, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Bearing all of this information in mind, the question still arises for some. Why should I vote? The most obvious reason why it's important to vote is because many American citizens face several hardships and tribulations as they fought for this right. Citizens today are forgetting that their ancestors made these sacrifices so that they could have a voice in the future of their country. Even today, American citizens are being denied their right to vote. In 2012, American citizens were denied their voting rights, waiting in line for hours to vote, and then being turned away because they didn't have a required form of identification. In 2013, major changes were made to the Voter Rights Act of 1965. Under Section 5 of this law, jurisdictions with a history of discrimination had to be pre-approved. This is known as pre-clearance. It was created to stop discrimination before it occurs. In the court case of Shelby County versus Holder, it nullified Section 4 of the Act, which determined which states fell under Section 5. This ruling was made based off of the idea that pre-clearance was unconstitutional. As a result, many states began to restrict and discriminate against who could vote again. This struck fear in many United States citizens as it was sure to have a monumental effect on the 2016 election. The United States has been described as spiraling back into its old ways of discrimination. Through education, voting history can be recalled rather than repeated. Another reason American citizens choose not to vote is because they believe that their vote doesn't matter. Even if a candidate was destined to win by a landslide, your one vote could close that winning gap. And citizens who support third-party views think their votes won't matter, but it's been proven that winning candidates often focus on issues that were brought up by third parties in their campaigns. For example, in 1992, Ross Perot's third-party campaign is credited with making budget deficit a huge concern of President Clinton's. Whether it's your president, your child's schooling, your taxes, or your job, your vote does have an effect on yours and your family's future. The main reason that any teacher will want to include voter education in their classroom is that educating students on these topics will enable them to understand, participate in, and make informed decisions about their world. These lessons will create ties to their own world and make them want to make a difference. In turn, students will become active problem solvers and gain social skills. Considering all of these benefits, teachers are still faced with obstacles and barriers such as high-stakes testing, which prevent them from teaching subjects such as voter education. Because of the No Child Left Behind Act, teachers have had to cut social studies from their curriculum and begin teaching for the test. This means that teachers are focusing on subjects such as reading, writing, and math. History and democracy are falling by the wayside. Even though it's been proven that cutting social studies from your curriculum lowers literacy levels and increases the achievement gap. Still, teachers are forced to focus on reading, writing, and math, and only 1/4 of students are proficient in social studies. So how can we relay all of the benefits of teaching these subjects to the parents? Teachers may find some friction with parents who choose not to vote. As teachers begin any conversation with a parent, it's important to be appropriate, professional, and use vocabulary that is free of any educational jargon. Using educational jargon that the parents don't understand might make them feel inferior or uncomfortable. It's best to relay the information in a way that reassures them and comforts them. Let the parents know that teaching civic duty is a part of a set of research-based standards. Each state puts out a set of these standards that teachers must legally follow. Of course, as teachers are teaching these subjects, they will remain unbiased in every single way. Letting the parents know that their children will never be persuaded in their voting often gives them a sense of relief. In any situation where a teacher feels that a parent might be uncomfortable, it's important to be proactive and leave an open line of communication. Now that we've reflected on why we teach voter education, it's important to talk about how we teach voter education. Again, let's take it back to the beginning of voter history, as that's likely where the unit will start. Any good teacher will ensure that all of their activities in this unit are active and engaging. It's always beneficial to provide visual aids. In this case, teachers may want to find age-appropriate pictures of the civil rights movement and the women's suffrage movement. Pictures can include peaceful protests, sit-ins, and marches. For older students, teachers can even include pictures of Bloody Sunday, of course censoring when it's appropriate. Voting history is a great time to use the think, pair, share model, where students think about a subject, pair up with a friend, and discuss what they came up with. Another great way to dip the students' toes into voting rights is to run a "you can't vote" simulation. This means that the teacher will choose at random students who cannot participate in an election. For example, if you're wearing blue today, you can't vote. The reaction of the students is commonly outrage and a sense of feeling left out. From here, the teacher can introduce the idea that some American citizens actually were denied their right to participate, based on appearance, gender, or skin color. As the unit progresses on, the teacher can always have the kids come back to this moment and think about how it made them feel. This will make the students want to be active participants in their learning. From here, the teacher can talk with the kids about the idea that some people choose not to vote. Again, students react with shock and disbelief. How, after years of oppression and fighting, can some citizens choose not to vote and allow their future to be decided for them? Again, the teacher is making this subject meaningful and tying it into the students' emotions. They're going to want to participate in this lesson. The teacher can build off of these emotions and start talking about voter participation in our country, or the lack thereof. He or she can ask the students why they think that people aren't voting today. Again, this is the perfect opportunity for a think, pair, share model or an open classroom discussion. A super engaging and beneficial way to get kids involved in this topic is to have them create brochures. They can pack these brochures full of information and data that they've collected through their own research. This is cross-disciplinary in that it encourages research, data interpretation, and writing skills. Students can share their brochures around the school and extend the conversation past the classroom. They can make a difference in the voter turnout in their community. The class can also extend the conversation past the classroom by creating a PSA or a public service announcement. Students can do their own research, collect their data, and present it in a 30-second to 1-minute long video. At the end of the video, they include a call to action, which asks the viewers to get out there and change the gap in voter participation. Another great way to keep the conversation going is to invite high school students who are voting or are close to voting into the classroom. Elementary kids really look up to the high school students. And if they hear how excited high school students are to vote, they'll want to vote as well when they get their chance. Now that our students want to vote, we have to teach them how to vote. Educating them young on the voting process will make it much less intimidating when it comes their time to walk into the voting booth. One of the best ways to do this is to hold a mock election. This can be an election of classroom students or real-life candidates. They can even vote for preferences, such as their favorite game to play at recess or their favorite lunch. You can take the voting process step by step, from registering to vote to actually stepping into the voting booth. As the students learn by doing, the teacher can express to them how important it is that they do their own research and vote for who they think is morally fit. Teachers can even show the students the behind the scenes of the voting process by having them run the voting booth and count the votes. This is another great way to incorporate data collection and interpretation. Any and all of the strategies we've discussed are not only effective, but cost efficient. There are also a multitude of online resources that the teacher can use. One resource that's great for the teacher and the students is isidewith.com. This website has the user answer several relevant questions on issues today. It then produces who they should vote for based on the answers they provide. The questions they ask are updated frequently and the site is completely unbiased. Another effective online resource is nationalmockelection.org and/or kidsvotingusa.org. Users can participate in mock elections and learn a little bit more about the voting process. For a different perspective on the voting process, teachers can have the students go to the site icivics.org. The site puts the student in the seat of someone running for election via simulation. Scholastic's news election site is packed with information on voting rights and the voting process via the road to the White House. They also provide online polls and timelines. Visual aids such as these are a great way to get the kids hooked in the lesson. ReadWorks is a free online reading resource. They provide articles and information based on grade level. And finally, BrainPop is an online resource that requires a subscription. The site provides videos and activities. The videos have lovable characters so the kids will be active and engaged the whole time. The resources available for civic education are limitless. So when one signs on to be an educator, they sign on to fulfill a civic mission. This mission is to foster knowledgeable, thinking, and active citizens. In order to fulfill this mission, teachers must educate students on voting rights, democracy, and the voting process. And as teachers begin to fulfill their mission, the voter participation gap will begin to close. Closing this gap is so important because the right to vote is one that is still being fought for today. As teachers begin to use the innumerable strategies we've talked about today, they'll begin to see a change in their students as they choose to become active citizens and make use of their voice. Because they've been introduced to the idea of democracy young, their desire to fulfill their civic duty and become knowledgeable and active citizens will only continue to strengthen. Voter participation will again begin to rise, and the future of the United States will be in the hands of responsible, educated, and high-quality citizens.